Thanks. So good morning, everybody. And this is a meeting of the Vermont Climate Council. Jane, can you say a word about council appointments?
Sure. Morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Briefly, just to give an update, we received notice from the Speaker of the House office on Friday afternoon that 2 of the seats on the Climate Council have been filled. So we are welcoming back Chris Campany to sit and represent the seat for municipal government. And so Chris, obviously, for many of you is a common face, a face that we're excited to have back, providing capacity on the Climate Council. And for others, Chris Campany is the Executive Director of Wyndham Regional Planning Commission and served on the Climate Action Plan and the Climate Action Council during the first iteration of the planning process. So glad to have you back. And I'll pause after I introduce the second appointment for both of you to introduce yourselves, not knowing if Matt Coda is here, but Matt Coda has also been appointed to the Climate Council to represent the fuel dealer seat, which we're really excited to have his participation, understanding that this seat has been vacant since the update to the Climate Action Plan, so almost 2 years since Brian Gray stepped down. So those 2 seats have been appointed, and that rounds out sort of the appointments from the speaker's side for now. Just a reminder that we still have 2 vacancies on the Senate side, one that represents the youth voice on the Climate Council and one that represents resilience. And we are working closely through the steering committee members to hopefully have those appointments sooner rather than later to support the update to the Climate Action Plan. So welcome to Matt and welcome back to Chris Campany. So glad to have you all here.
So good. And Jared, I bet you have a word on the Senate appointments.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide an update. I was able to speak with Ashley Moore recently, who's the Chief of Staff to the Senate President, Senator Phil Baruth, and she gave some guidance in terms of their process and timeline that I just wanted to share with everybody, which is the Senate Committee on Committees, which consists of the Senate President, Phil Baruth, the Lieutenant Governor, David Zuckerman, and the third member of the Committee on Committees is Senator Jane Kitchell. They will be looking to make appointments within the next month. And if anybody has nominees for either the youth representative or the resilience representative, they would invite a bio and an explanation of why they're interested and their qualifications by email to the Committee on Committees, CCing both Ashley Moore, again, the Chief of Staff to Senator Baruth, and Lisa Gerlach, the Chief of Staff to the Lieutenant Governor.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Jared. All right. So welcome, Matt. Welcome, Chris. Let's get going this morning. As is usual, we have our agenda and everything online. I can go ahead and drop it in the chat, the link. Hang on a second. Here's all the materials. That should get you to the right place. If it doesn't, let me know. Let me share my screen with the agenda. I'll just walk through that briefly, and then we can get moving. Okay, so here's our agenda today. We'll need to do our usual approval of the minutes and sort of administrative stuff after we look at this agenda. We have Kelly is going to give us a few thoughts in this just transition reflection about a training coming up. And there's also this pretty great visual guide about incorporating just transition principles that's designed for subcommittees, and it's helpful for all of us. So that's how we'll do our just transition moment. Then Jane's going to lay out a draft outline of the updated climate action plan, which you'll see looks a lot like the previous one with a few additions. And so we want to walk through that. And as we're getting feedback, giving feedback to Jane on that, we want to talk a little bit about prioritization and how that's all going to go, how all that's going to work this fall. So we'll look at the draft outline and we'll talk a little bit about prioritization. Then the Science and Data Subcommittee is going to ask for a final approval of the social cost of greenhouse gases. We did this in our last meeting, as is our usual habit. We try to do with substantive things, we try to do 2 hits at it. So today is our second hit. We're trying to approve it, and they'll show you an incorporated version, a version that incorporates your comments from last time. We'll take some public comment around 12:20. The reason we're doing it here is that we'll take some public comment before you actually make a final decision around this updated social cost of social cost of greenhouse gases document. We'll take a break around 12:30, 12:35. We'll come back, and I'll lead us in a conversation about the public engagement that's been happening and what we're hearing from it. We'll do a little exercise around that. And that's what we'll do for the day today. We'll finish up with another round of public comment towards the end of our meeting. We'll talk about next steps and what to expect over the next few months, and then we'll finish up by 2. All right, so that's what we're doing, and I don't have my screen set up properly, so I can't see you right now. Oh, Bram has a hand up. Okay, great. Bram, jump in.
Just noticing that in the minutes of the previous meeting, I think there was a recommendation that we add the guidelines for camera use to the agenda. And
we didn't do that.
Up at the top where it has passcode and everything, just I think it's one sentence, right? Saying council meeting, etc. So I think we can do that for next time.
Thanks, Bram. I'm so glad you brought that up, and I apologize we don't have that here. And indeed, for those who are joining us today, our sort of guidelines as a Vermont Climate Council for having cameras on and off at the Zoom meetings is we encourage counselors, if they can keep their cameras on, particularly during discussion pieces, is great. If you're not a member of the council, if you're joining us because you're an interested observer or you're a member of a subcommittee or something, we actually ask you to keep your cameras off unless it's a public comment period. So if you're not a council member, encourage you to keep those cameras off unless we're in a public comment period. Okay, thanks, Bram. I'm glad you brought that up. Any other questions or reactions to the agenda before we dive in? Okay. Great. We need to approve the minutes from last time. They are linked in that same link with all the meeting materials, at least they should be. Let me double check they really are there. Yes, they are there. The minutes are clicked here. I'll drop them in the chat. If anybody needs an extra second to take a look at those, they should be in that link right there. In case we missed somebody's name or something is wrong. All right, does anybody need an extra moment to look at those? Okay. Any concerns with the minutes from our last meeting? Great. All right, with that, we'll consider those minutes approved. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate that. Thanks, June. Okay, so our first item on the agenda is what we like to start every meeting with, which is a reflection on just transitions. Kelly, you're going to give us a little outlook about some training opportunities coming up and also share that graphic that you all put together. Let me know if you need me to share my screen with anything or if you can do it yourself.
Great. Yes, thank you. I can certainly do the screen share in a minute. So good to see everybody here. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Just Transition Subcommittee for the Climate Council, and over the summer we had a few meetings with members of our subcommittee as well as some members of other subcommittees just to talk through how best to be using the guiding principles and ensuring that we are embedding equity in everything we do as we work on this revision. And some of the feedback we got led us to wanting to create an additional tool. And now this is to use in addition to the guiding principles, which we created prior to the previous version of the Climate Action Plan. This is not to replace them in any way, but to give a little bit more guidance and help people work through them and keep equity present in the process at every single step of the way. So I think I'll show what that is, if that makes sense, if I'm able to do screen share.
Liz Amler will be the one to.
Yes, can you all see this on my screen here?
Yep.
Good.
Yep.
Okay. So our subcommittee put this together based on, so the timeline at the top is more or less what was created, and this is our work plan for our subcommittees and our council for the next few months. To help complement that, we added some action items below each section. And so, we're already past early September, but hoping that we wanted to get this out as soon as possible. So folks are hopefully in reviewing the engagement reports. We have a checklist, which, let me see, if I click on this, it won't bring up the new thing, but it's a list that is based on some of the impacted and frontline communities that we had in the original Just Transitions Guiding Principles. Those are also linked at the top here. So we're trying to make a compact document that links out to other resources so that hopefully it's easy to use. And so we're talking about these different steps here. So if we're in this August and early October section, we have some action items here reflecting on the engagement materials that we've received, participating in outreach events. And this is really geared towards the subcommittees, but I know we're all on subcommittees. And I think these are also helpful for us as a council to be considering as we work on our revision. So then down below, we have these rectangles, which have some questions that are from the Just Transition Guiding Principles document that we created. And to help us not get overwhelmed by all the questions and all of the things, we tried to pull out some that are more relevant at certain stages of the process. I won't read the whole thing, but there's some really good guidance here. And we also have a link here to some plain language guidance, which is going to be really, I think that's really important and something that our subcommittee is hoping we can encourage more of in this revision. And let's see, so moving on, we have November, we're doing some stakeholder events. We really want to make sure that subcommittees are engaged in that, getting their questions out, hearing from the public, trying to make sure that they're reaching the folks that they really need to be hearing from. And then in November and December, we have this prioritization area. And then each of the subcommittees has a liaison from this Just Transition subcommittee. And so they're a resource for all of the subcommittees, and they may not be an expert in every single, certainly they're not experts in every single area or question of equity, but they're there as a resource, as a sounding board. And then there are other ways that our subcommittee can support, which was on the next page. I'll get to that, but I wanted to point out, this is not the end of the roadmap here. There will be more. We will be expanding this as our timeline is expanded as a council, and adding more things, bringing up more of the questions and considerations from the Just Transition Guiding Principles. Again, our goal here is to make sure that equity is embedded in everything we do, and to make it so that we have as much guidance as possible without making things overwhelming and having that be a reason that things don't happen, right? We don't want people to have so much that they're like, I don't even know where to start, and that equity work doesn't get done. Our goal is to have equity work done and make this the most just and equitable transition possible, regardless of the tools we're using, which is why we're trying to get as many options out there so that we can make this as easy and streamlined as possible and have the best outcome. So on this last page here are some more resources. So yes, we have liaisons on each subcommittee from our Just Transition subcommittee. We also will invite other subcommittees or council members when that becomes relevant with some of our, especially with our cross-cutting issues, to come to one of our meetings. If you have a specific question or an area that you're really feeling stuck, or you're just not sure if you're asking the right questions or finding the right stakeholders, we invite people to come to our meetings. We request that you ask the co-chairs to get on the agenda at least 1 week prior, because that's when we plan. We have been meeting the first Thursday of the month, And down at the bottom, you have our contact information for co-chairs and our staff support. Also, if there's something that's just a question, you can email us in between meetings. Or if there's something really urgent and your liaison's not sure how to help, you can reach out to our leadership team. But our whole subcommittee is a great resource, and so we have a diversity of information, of experience and backgrounds and all of that. So they're a great resource, and the liaisons also come back to us. So if they notice something or have questions, they can come back to us in between subcommittee meetings as well. So hopefully this is going to make things easier and help remove some of the initial stumbling blocks or hesitation that some folks might be feeling about being worried about doing things wrong. The only way to do equity work wrong is to not do it at all. As far as, I mean, that's the main reason. That there are definitely other ways to do it wrong. Don't misunderstand me. But I do think, we're at risk of failure by not acting rather than acting wrongly. And so I want to make sure that everyone has the encouragement to do this good work. I'll pause there. Any questions about this document? I can scroll back up. And then I wanted to also finish with, actually, yeah, I'll finish with briefly. We have also another resource tool and guidance is we've been working with the Office of Racial Equity with the state, and hopefully we'll be providing a really great training workshop for everybody. We would love to offer this for everybody on the Climate Council and all the subcommittees. We had a wonderful training from Susanna Davis before our first climate action plan, and it's clearly long overdue to do more of this. And so we're hoping to provide this as a standalone workshop, maybe 90 minutes, and encourage everybody to attend so that we can really get ourselves refreshed or trained in the first place on some of the language and considerations that we'll be dealing with as we work on embedding equity in everything we do. And so I don't know that we have anything officially on the books. One of the things that I requested, and this is, I think, still an outstanding question, though Jane may have an answer, is whether we can make sure that this would count as an official meeting where everyone could get the full $50 per diem for attending. Because I think that's going to be really important to make sure that we can have as much participation in this event as possible. So no official date or anything on that yet, but that is the other last piece there. So any questions? And I can bring that screen back up if anyone wanted to see something again.
And Kelly, just to reiterate, that training's for subcommittee members and counselors, right? That's the goal of that.
Yes, yeah, that would be the goal. And it wouldn't just be training on the just transition guiding principles, but on equity in general and how we can be incorporating equity considerations into our work. So, the Office of Racial Equity has a ton of experience in this in general, and they'll also, I think, try to offer some things that are specifically related to this climate policy work that we're engaged in. But the principles and the language, we want to, align our language and make sure we all know what we're talking about when we talk about the different types of equity and things like that, so that we can have really robust discussions and be able to also figure out who we should be reaching out to about different issues and things.
Great. Any questions for Kelly or the Just Transitions folks about that graphic and how subcommittees should be using it? Or are using it, and or questions about this training opportunity that's coming up? It's a quiet crowd today, Kelly.
I either explained it very thoroughly or I bored everybody to tears. I'm not sure.
Leslie Ann?
I was trying to find the reactions and raise hand, but I couldn't find it quickly enough. Kelly and the other members of the subcommittee who are on, I know you don't have your cameras on, but I just wanted to say thank you for stepping through and creating this really nice graphic of a lot of the work that went in to get to this point. And I think what might be really, really helpful as we're rolling it out is to either have the liaisons to the committee or the co-chairs or somebody actually be present in one of the subcommittee meetings to actually talk through and lay it out so that any misperceptions or misconceptions that might arise get allayed from the get-go, that it's not superseding the even more awesome work that went into creating the guiding principles themselves, which I use all the time in a lot of all my work because I think they're really, really strong. If you can sort of just elevate the visuals of what the goal is here, I think a lot of folks would be, oh yeah, and then see those examples on where things can actually fit in, and then that elevates all of this even more. So great piece of work, and maybe some of that front end explanation so that things are feeding into it and not superseding, right? That would be awesome. Thanks.
Yes, very well said. And one other thing I would add is I think it would be great if the subcommittees can schedule a little bit of time in the next meeting or two to have a little bit of this, have a liaison, talk about the guiding principles in general and talk about this. I think that would be wonderful. I mean, if you want to schedule time for equity considerations at the beginning of every meeting, like we do with our full council meetings, that's even better. But I think that would be a resource, and your liaison could help with that. Or if they don't feel comfortable, someone else from the Just Transition Subcommittee would certainly be happy to come to a meeting for that as well. Thanks so much, Dr. Dupany-Giroux. That's a really good point.
Any other reactions, questions? Okay. Wonderful. Thanks, Kelly. And I think echoing Leslie Ann's, like it's a very, very helpful graphic with a complex topic. And so hopefully the subcommittees and this full council feels the clarity that that graphic's trying to explain. All right. And then the training, I don't know, Jane or Liz, Emler, is in terms of scheduling that training up, is there anything we need to say right now about that? We're looking at a 90-minute online thing, right?
Yeah, I think that the steering committee talked about it, and Secretary Moore and I discussed the need to just more closely track our per diems, just to ensure that as we ramp up with the climate action plan, that we have enough in our budget to do that. But I believe we indicated, and Secretary Moore can correct me if I'm wrong, at the steering committee that we thought we, for now, had enough capacity to support that, but that over time that it was just going to be a question of just ensuring that we track that closely within our budget. But the expectation is Just Transitions would work, I think, closely with the environmental, the racial equity office in order to plan those out and propose a schedule. And the expectation is that all counselors and subcommittee members would attend those, similar to how when we were building the guiding principles, Just Transitions provided a similar training for all counselors and subcommittee members.
Super.
David, if I could, this may be the right time for a shameless plug or reminder to folks that we are asking for per diem requests to be filled out quarterly. And so we're coming up on the end of a quarter here in the next week, and ask that people do their best to submit their per diem requests for third quarter of the current calendar year by the middle of October. And just know that we will be unable to honor per diem requests received significantly after the close of the quarter. So thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Okay. All right. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kelly. All right. Let's switch gears then and dive into this outline of an updated climate action plan. I'll turn it over to Jane, and Jane, feel free to share your own screen or however you want to do that. And this is something that the steering committee's looked at. And I think it's important as a full council that we look at it and think about this product that we're building towards. So Jane, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, David. And maybe I'll just say, as we move into looking at the online draft, that the conversation that Kelly was just teeing up about the Just Transitions principles, as well as some slides that I understand expect David will have sort of to support the conversation around prioritization, is all really important too as we start to lay out a timeline, framework, and expectations for the update to the climate action plan. And so this is really a first step, and I'm going to walk you through the table of contents, which looks at sort of what was done for the initial climate action plan, what we expect will largely remain the same for this update, and the primary responsibilities, and sort of speak to what I've added in at the request of the steering committee, sort of a proposed timeline and schedule, and I can speak to the rationale around how that was built. And all of this and your feedback today will sort of build around expectations for Liz Amler and I to work on a much more robust and detailed drafting schedule between now and your next council meeting in December, with the expectation and understanding that drafting the cap is a significant undertaking, understanding that all drafts, editing, comments is public in nature, and all of that will have to be reviewed in public meeting and therefore have ample time to be warned, discussed, and then revised. And so it feels somewhat far away, July 1st too, but it does not perhaps feel as far away as some of us would like it to anymore. So excited to sort of broach the subject today and start to talk about it. So let me, hold on one sec. I share it. I have to have that one highlighted. Okay, share. Okay. I'd like to start by sharing that some of the resources we have through the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant and the funding that we have in that space is hopefully going to allow us to think about how we weave in and tell a more compelling story with the Climate Action Plan this time around stories and Vermonters' voices in the plan. And so that is something that we have down towards the end of this document, but I want you to be thinking about it as we talk through all of the components, because it's something we're working on closely with Sophie Beltrop here in our office to think about how we do that credibly this time, as we ran out of time last time, and would really like a plan that sort of elevates case studies, elevates Vermont voicers in the solutions and recommendations that you're putting forward, as well as we think about what really needs to be in the body of the plan versus an appendix or sort of the back. Last time the plan obviously was very long, included a lot of tables, a lot of stuff that's hard to really tell a compelling narrative around. And so Sophie and I, as well as Liz, will continue to meet and think about what that schedule looks like for drafting, but also how we format templates and push out this plan in a way that's more user-friendly and ultimately hopefully leads to a document that you can hold in your hand, feel proud of, and actually have a Vermont state climate action plan that isn't just a stapled Word document is what we're going for. So I'm gonna just walk, oh, sorry, my watch thought I was talking to it. And so I'm gonna walk through this and really probably do a little bit more detail than I did for the steering committee, understanding that many of the steering committee members were around the first time and some of you as new counselors were not. So I want to just walk you through what we included in the plan. Regardless of if we're carrying it forward, much of this will need to be updated and propose some rationale around how we are thinking about where that work originates, understanding that all of it comes forward into a plan that is really approved and supported by the council. And so we're trying to get that substance up from subcommittees to you sooner this time in an effort to have more time to deliberate and really make the decisions at the council, not the last minute from things coming up from the subcommittees. Okay, so the climate action plan starts with a letter from the council. It's really a statement around your work and the vision for the plan. We expect that to carry forward into this next plan and be updated by all of you as a council. Now, just note that when I signal more detail is needed, yes, this will be drafted by the Climate Council, but who specifically puts pen to paper, that's the detail that we really are going to need to work on over the course of the next few months. But this was written by a group of counselors as a draft the last time, and expect that will be how we carry it forward. I don't think it needs to be updated until sort of June of next year. And maybe I should back up and just say that the work and the rollout of how we're thinking about these dates is really twofold. One, or actually threefold, I should say. One, how do we get the substance up from the subcommittees to the council by the end of this calendar year? So really, how does the subcommittee put forward and deliberate recommendations, get that to the Climate Council by December, so that January through March is really a deliberation period for what you want to carry forward as recommendations and what those higher level priorities look like, with the goal of sort of that second touch point of having a complete draft of the climate action plan by the end of March. Because if you'll recall from previous discussions, we have contemplated capacity around April and May for those in-person around state meetings to really roll out a complete draft of the climate action plan. So we're thinking about what all of the substances in that plan done or put forward as a draft to iterate on with Vermonters by the end of March. And then that third touch point are all the things that can kind of come after that tell the story, make it a tied together nice plan. So things like the letter from the council, the executive summary, those are things that you will need to review and discuss, but they don't need to be there by the end of March to go out to the public with. So it's really subcommittee components up through December, putting together a draft that has all the substance from the council by March, and then a complete draft by July 1st that's incorporates that public feedback as well along the way. So letter from the council, executive summary are all things that will be coming in that third phase, as well as you all might remember that as the council, you sat together and developed a land acknowledgement that was included in the first climate action plan. We're proposing that can stay the same for this plan, but ask you all to discuss that today if that's something you'd like to update or work on collaboratively again. I don't actually know sort of the protocol around like how often those should be updated, what the process looks like that for, so would welcome feedback, but for now have proposed that could stay the same. The executive summary is something that our office is willing to tie together and summarize for all of you, and would do that in May. So you had some time to iterate on. Acknowledgements and using this plan are really just quick updates from the council, as well as using this plan as pretty much a guidance document around what pathways, strategies, and actions are. And I largely think that can stay the same. So I have proposed that. The next sections, climate change in Vermont. That is something that Dr. Leslie Ann Dupuy-Giroux took the lead on with Jay Schaefer last time through the Science and Data Subcommittee. Again, this is a really critical piece to update for this plan, but don't see it as something for that first phase of deliberating on. It's really a draft that will be vetted through the council and included in the plan. And we're proposing February for that so that it could be part of the plan that gets rolled out with the public. Vermont energy economy and opportunities related to climate action. We're proposing an updated title to this, change the title to the Vermont Climate Economy, Energy, Resilience, and Opportunities Related to Climate Action. You'll see this theme throughout any updates that we've recommended in the table of contents around how to more thoughtfully think about climate action beyond just the energy transition and decarbonization, but how to roll resilience and adaptation and other components of the Climate Council's recommendations in. This has lived with the Science and Data Subcommittee, and we are proposing that it still sit there as the first place for drafting and would come at the same time as the climate change in Vermont in February. The climate action plan requirements, that's just verbatim language from the GWSA, so it can stay the same, hopefully. The foundational criteria is the work that we do around prioritization. And so this really needs some thought still about what that looks like, how we're lifting up recommendations and edits needed to that. And David's prepared to talk a little bit about that today. We're proposing that be updated and modified, and our office can help support that as well and put that forward for the draft for the February timeline as well. Public engagement is a section that will largely be drafted and iterated throughout the process, but really a complete draft won't be done till we hold those meetings in April and May and hear from Vermonters throughout the whole timeline of drafting the cap. And so our office, supported by Just Transitions, will take the lead on drafting that, and that will also come again after the engagement, but prior to you all vetting the draft in June, so in May. Building equity into the cap and ensuring a just transition, that is largely the guiding principles. So I imagine that will be updated with some of the process around how we are institutionalizing that work through liaisons, through tools like the graphic that Kelly just showed. And that is something that we can have drafted through Just Transitions by February of this year for that draft that we roll out with the public. An update we're proposing is rather than coordination of the Climate Action Plan and Comprehensive Energy Plan chapter, you'll recall that the GWSA actually requires that these two state plans be coordinated. However, I'm not sure why, but when the GWSA was drafted, the timeline of the CAP and the CEP doesn't always align. The CEP is updated every 6 years. The cap is updated every 4 years. I say I don't know why, but it's largely, I imagine, so that we can have more regular caps sooner in the process to meet the early emissions reductions targets. And so the cap is being updated right now, and the CEP is not. And so we're proposing to still speak to how those two plans align or don't in this, but also to broaden this chapter to speak to how coordination of the cap is incumbent with other state planning processes overall, and really signal here how we bring in the state hazard mitigation plan, as well as the development of the resilience implementation strategy, which you all should might remember is now being developed by our office in support of the governor and the treasurer's initiative, and will be adopted the same time as the update to the cap. So our office is willing to take the lead on drafting that initial chapter for the plan, and will be due in February as well. And so rather than go through, the last individual chapter before I get to the substance of recommendations is the scientific underpinning of the climate action plan. This spoke to many of the technical analyses that we did the last time for the climate action plan. I imagine it will this time too, as well as some of the foundational work around the development of the measuring and assessing progress tool, the greenhouse gas inventory, and others. And the Science and Data Subcommittee will lead on that first draft, and we're proposing it would be done as well in February. So the next sort of series of chapters deals with the recommendations. And if you'll remember sort of the structure, it goes pathways, strategies, and actions. The pathways is really the what needs to be done for climate action. The strategies is sort of a measurable objective underneath the pathways. And then the actions are those operational tasks that need to move forward to actually meet the overall objective of that pathway. That is the structure that all the substantive subcommittees are using to address mitigation, sequestration, and resilience in both the built environment and natural environment. And we have this proposal that many of those will all come from the subcommittees, be iterated on by the council. Those drafts will all come in December, which doesn't show here, but then be crafted and written by the subcommittees that have ownership. So that is a point of discussion for you all about whether or not subcommittees feel that's too much of an ask of them, if they should largely just send the recommendations up to the council. But we actually feel like even once those recommendations are deliberated on, they should largely live with those subcommittees to be expanded on and written. So that's a point for you all to discuss and see if that makes sense, and or if subcommittees feel like that's too much to ask of them. We did leave the mitigation pathways overview with the council, because that is a space that becomes a bit more political in the way it's narrated and crafted, and we suggested that the council would craft that overview that speaks to all the pathways underneath that section. So buildings, thermal, transportation, ag, and electricity, and then non-energy. So beyond that, I'll just say that many of you, because you all serve on subcommittees and have seen the correspondence, the steering committee did approve a process for dealing with cross-cutting pathways this time. In the first climate action plan, we had both cross-cutting pathways and then cross-cutting themes. We're proposing removing cross-cutting themes from this update to the climate action plan and just focusing on a narrow segment of pathways, which are around compact settlement, education, and workforce. And we have a proposed memo that the steering committee adopted, and Liz Amler is leading for our office to coordinate on behalf of both those updates and then further recommendations in that space. The memo is on today's agenda and linked online, and we're happy to answer any questions or talk about how that process is going once I finish with this update here. Finally, the last few chapters really get at the benefits and burdens of energy choices. That is a science and data update. That also gets at where we were able to last time speak to personal action and how to balance sort of Vermonters seeing themselves in a role in this plan with sort of the larger systemic changes that need to happen. The Climate Action Office is willing to support the Climate Council in updating sort of a statement around progress and implementation from the last cap. We are happy to sort of be the number crunchers, update data kind of people, and then imagine that the council will want to take over how to craft that narrative, understanding that there might be a tension around sort of how strong to signal action has occurred over the last few years. And that's something for the council to debate and discuss how you'd like to frame that up. So we're happy to support the technical analysis around that. And then the narrative we suggest would be best suited with the Climate Council. The legislative action and rulemaking section, you'll recall, this is just a review of all the recommendations across all the chapters, pulling all of that up into one table so that it's clear what is required for rulemaking and what is required of the legislature to act. So the Climate Office is willing to do that once all the recommendations have been finalized by the Climate Council. And then largely the rest of these components are updates and chapters that were in the first plan that just sort of round out any large state plan with next steps, how to connect with the council, the work in between definitions, and any of the attachments. And our office, balanced with the council, will help support some of that work in compiling the document. And then really quickly, the final two chapters, which is a nice tee up to hand it back to David. First and foremost, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're exploring how to support all the work that we're doing out in on the road in communities with Vermonters, how to lift up their voices and pull those stories directly to recommendations and suggestions in the climate plan this time to make it a document where Vermonters really see themselves in it, and hopefully also think about how case studies can be lifted up as a model to build off collaborative action. Sophie and I are working on that with Liz's support as well. And then finally, as teed up and excited and energized through the State Hazard Mitigation Plan, those 234 actions from the first Climate Action Plan are probably not getting whittled down much for this plan. If anything, there'll probably still be 200 actions in this update plan, but really we're feeling like an appreciation and acknowledgement that not all of those can move at once, and a process around how we lift up and really tell a compelling story about what needs to happen immediately and in the near term to really move the needle on climate action across all areas. So this is not going to be just focused on mitigation to meet our targets, but also what are those high priority actions around resilience and adaptation and mitigation, sequestration as well. So it'll be a compilation of recommendations from the 4 substantive subcommittees and then pulled together in a new chapter that really highlights that focus for government, legislature, and others to work on imminently after the plan is adopted. So that was a lot. I'm sorry, it's sort of boring in a table of contents, but hopefully it's helpful for you all to see this and really understand the work that lies ahead. And hopefully through some good discussion and note-taking today, it will help give us guidance on how best to support you in developing a more detailed sort of roadmap on how we're going to get from today to July 1st and have a plan that isn't adopted in real time at the last minute, like it was last time. Hopefully set us up for success a little better this time. So David, I'll turn it back over to you to facilitate any questions and then highlight what you'd like to around prioritization and other work.
Super. Thanks, Jane. Okay, so that was a lot. And it's trying to get our hands around the product we're creating and a timeline for making that product with a little bit more space than we had last time, and the opportunity to be out doing different kinds of public engagement in different moments, including on an entire draft plan. All right. Quickly, let's do clarifying questions. Any questions for Jane about this table of contents? Anything that's not clear, or any feedback, you sort of quick clarifying stuff for Jane? Anything? Leslie Ann?
It's not so much a clarifying question, David. I just wanted to maybe offer a counterpoint. And I think because we have so many new council members, so many new folks around these squares that we don't know each other as well as we would like to know each other, one of the things that was a really, really bonding moment for us last time around was the creation of the land acknowledgement, and the way in which Judy Dowell led us through physically being in the places that we were all across the state and looking outside and looking at all of those pieces and then bringing those in to help write that land acknowledgement. I think it might be a nice sort of like group dynamic process if we could do that again and maybe revisit the updating of what our land acknowledgement might look like. So I just wanted to offer that as one suggestion. And then the other piece is the climate change in Vermont piece that I'm spearheading again. That might be tweaked a little bit, but happy to have a conversation about what that might look like, because we haven't had it in our subcommittee as yet, but know that that's sort of bubbling up and coming to the fore.
Thanks for both of those. Yeah. Jared?
Thanks, David. First, I just want to thank Jane and anybody else who worked on this. I think it's really well organized and clear and a really helpful resource. I have two specific pieces of feedback and then one kind of question / concern. The two pieces of feedback are in that fourth column around responsibility. There's a couple of key areas of contents that kind of are proposed to just be with the Climate Action Office and the administration that I think are important, that there be a council role in the drafting and writing, and those would be the executive summary, how we're summarizing what's in the plan and the recommendations. I think that I would recommend changing that from CAO to CIO/council, and similarly in terms of the summary at the end with regard to legislative action and rulemaking, making sure that the administration and the council are on the same page about how that gets summarized. I think that the biggest challenge and concern in my mind, and I grant that this is primarily thinking from a perspective of somebody who's on both the cross-sector mitigation and the science and data subcommittees, is that one thing that was incredibly helpful to us last time was the development of the pathways model, including an assessment of the business as usual, the baseline emissions, and then estimates of the scale and pace of climate pollution reduction that would be necessary to meet the legal requirements for emissions reduction. And I feel like right now we have a lot of uncertainty about where that process stands for updating that, and not yet clarity around a commitment to incorporate many of the key pieces that we had last time that were associated deliverables with the pathways model, including things like the marginal abatement cost curve and the broader economic analysis. And so I don't know if there's an update. I feel like in the past, the message has been, we're working on it, but I do think that it's important to get clarity on the process and the timeline for when we'll be able to have updated analysis to then inform some of the details of the recommendations in the plan regarding especially scale and pace. So if that's kind of not planned for this agenda, we can discuss it another time. I just want to flag it as a big question and concern in terms of it's kind of a chicken and the egg piece. A lot of the content and the details around the recommendations in the plan, I think they are dependent on an updated understanding, accurate understanding of where we stand and what the current trajectory is and what it will take to get on track to meet our climate pollution reduction requirements, and the other criteria as well.
Thanks, Jared. I'm glad you brought up that last point as well. And I wonder, Jane, if you can just say a word about timing of technical inputs and what technical inputs will be available over this period of time, those 3 touch points that you said, so folks can get a sense of what will be available, what isn't going to be available.
Yeah, so I feel like it's still like a little bit in progress, so sorry to not have a more detailed update. So goes contracting, but we are working on a contract for pathways, updated pathways analysis, updated business as usual, and pathways analysis. It does feel imminent. There have been some challenges along the way in that contracting process, but nothing out of the ordinary, just some contracting challenges, but it's imminent. I will say that there are no plans for any contracts around economic analysis as of right now, so that's something the Climate Council should discuss. But we are obviously very much aware that the BAU needs to be updated, as well as the pathways analysis to support any recommendations in that space. So hopeful that that will be moving forward imminently.
And Jane, if you could say sort of, if it moves forward imminently, that would come in and
Yeah.
provide analysis in the February timeframe or in the April timeframe? Is that sort of like, what's the
I
vision?
think I think once they're under contract, it can work. It can work in tandem with the recommendations being developed this fall with cross-sector. They're very much aware, the contractor, of the time sensitivities and the interest in having recommendations by the end of the year. That said, I'm sure it'll be an ongoing iterative process between now and March, but they're teed up to help as soon as possible and help hopefully this fall on the broader analysis of pathways. One thing I didn't mention that is under contract, which I believe many of you know, is we are working collaboratively with VTrans on a cap and invest study. And that cap and invest study looks at a couple different scenarios. It looks at how 2 different programs, New York's and Western Climate Initiative, would work to cover different sectors. The 3 scenarios being discussed are transportation, all fuels, and then all fuels and stationary sources in Vermont. And so that analysis, which is underway and due to be complete by the end of the year in December, in line with legislative requirements on us for that, does include an economic analysis. So I sort of glossed over that, but that is a robust analysis on one of the largest, if not the largest, policies being contemplated for this climate action plan. And that's in collaboration as well with the Treasurer's Office to support review of that analysis and make a recommendation back to the legislature this February.
Great. Okay. Other reactions to the outline and doing the work, the timing of the work, anything else from folks? Okay. So
David,
before
I
we
do
finish
have
up,
something.
oh
I'm
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
I couldn't find
Yeah,
my hand thing in time.
yeah, no worries.
So I appreciate the effort to organize and to learn lessons from the last go around. From the department's perspective, there's a great deal here that implicates the work we do. And I just need to put on the record that the period of time in which this work is expected to be accomplished overlaps with the period of time when the department is traditionally also laid out in terms of its ability to field legislative work during this period. So I think, for today, what I need to flag is serious resource constraints that I see for my agency, to the extent that we are tasked with drafting or coordinating and the like. It is very difficult to describe just how thinly the department has been spread over these last couple of years, and particularly in this area. The first time around, there were no new resources voted to the department and the legislature to do the work that we did on the first iteration of the Climate Action Plan. And we do not have any new resources for this work right now either. The new resources we have are directed at the Clean Heat Standard work, which many of you know is ongoing and expected to be quite intense in terms of debate and the like in the legislature this coming session. So I just need to flag that when the department details somebody to co-chair a committee, for instance, or to be a member of a committee, that is a serious bite out of the resources that we have for many of the things that we are assigned statutorily as well, in addition to our advocacy work before the PUC, over which we also have very little, if any, control. So I just wanted to flag that for today.
Thanks, June. Appreciate that. Chris, go ahead, please.
Yeah, two separate things. One, it seems like it'd be helpful, and I forget, I don't have the table of contents in front of me here, but maybe as part of the just transitions piece, or I don't have to figure out where, to kind of do a report on the direct and I guess indirect frontline climate community impacts resulting from the floods over the last actually wouldn't be just last couple of years. I think we need to include our 2021 flooding down here as well. I don't think it'd be like a heavy lift necessarily for Eric Foran and his crew. I think and Agency of Human Services, I think it'd be looking at the data of what was the public infrastructure damage, what was the 211 need report damage, where was it? Probably if VM and Agency of Human Services don't have a map, probably one of the RPCs, if we could get the data, could pull together a map, not like point data of individual homes, but like concentration of properties. Of course, businesses impacted and other things to kind of tell that story of where the damage has occurred and what that looks like for the direct impacts for these frontline communities, just related to flooding. We could also probably pull in the wind events and other things as well. So that's one item. And then a completely different item. I have no idea what the Climate Council has put in, if anything, to the legislature for a budget. And so you guys, like I said, I'm just coming back into this, but if now's the time to get in a request, if there is one, and it may need to be that there's of course, it needs to be a conversation among the council members as a whole as to what that might look like. But if there's disagreement, like between the administration members, because they're going to have direction as far as from their boss, understandably so, what the budget expectation should be. And if non-administration members, would feel like there needs to be kind of a supplementary communication to put that regard, like, making sure PSD, Department of Public Service, has the resources it needs to support this. It seems like some kind of request should need to come in, and maybe the timing just doesn't work. And maybe that's something we do in the future. But again, you guys have been actively working on this for the years that I've been out of it, so maybe I'll let it square it away.
Thanks, Chris. All right, so two things there from Chris. One about when we're talking about just transitions, we could include a description of what the flooding has meant in the recent years and tell that story, particularly around frontline communities. On this thing on budgets, I'm just curious, Chris, you're talking about a budget that's related to the work of the council. You're not talking about a budget for climate action, right?
Correct. The council itself.
Yeah.
But do we have the resources? I'm not talking of, the gold-plated toilet or anything like that. Just,
Right.
what is the basic operational needs for the council to do the work that it needs to do. So, and maybe you guys have already done that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, this is something where Secretary Moore, maybe, Julie, if you want to say a word about budgeting for council, for the climate council, whether it's from an AR perspective or in other state agencies.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we have the Climate Action Office now and have laid out for staff the, oh, good, Jane's going to drop the slides into the chat here, Chris, but we've laid out kind of what the capacity of our staff team is to provide support to the Climate Council on an ongoing basis. I think in FY24, the council also put forward a series of requests, first to the governor and then to legislative leadership, or non-administration members put forward to the governor and then legislative leadership a series of requests for resources around studies that were important to inform the work of the Climate Council. That didn't happen to the best of my recollection last year. And in part maybe because a lot of that work was taken up through climate pollution reduction grant funding, but certainly something that could continue to be discussed here. And Chris, you're very right that the time is sort of now. Agencies of state government are in active budget development with our proposals due to the governor in early October for his consideration. And so to the extent the Climate Council has specific requests, it is timely to talk about that sooner than not.
Okay. Let's put a pin in that. We don't have that on the agenda for today, and then our next meeting isn't until December, so I'll just put that out there, counselors. Like, I'm not quite sure how to address that, and if you have some ideas about how to address it, let's mention. Joey, go ahead, please.
Well, I don't know if Chris, you want to follow up. You raised your hand hot on the.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just was going to say something a little bit related to Chris's first recommendation, which I think is a good one. I do wonder if it would be important to include in the climate action plan outline some sort of snapshot of like where we're at and like lay of the land in terms of obviously a lot of things that are top of mind for people and when we're making a transition is the cost of that transition and ensuring it's an equitable transition for everyone. I do wonder if there's like sort of a snapshot of like, this is the cost of what Vermonters are paying for energy now. This is the cost of some of the, damages that have incurred over the last couple of years. So when we're talking about costs, we're helping Vermonters think about and set the stage for a transition off of fossil fuels and creating more resilient communities for everyone, that we just ground folks in what's the status quo, like what is the cost now, what are we trying to move people off of. I mean, things like I don't know, people have seen the rebuild by design, some of their analysis about the costs of some of the climate and disasters as of late. It feels like that might be helpful to ground people, and I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I find it to be very helpful in terms of talking about a transition.
Okay, like some big overarching framing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Related to both pollution reduction strategies and then, resilience, the cost of, as people can check out this report and analysis by Rebuild Design about sort of the costs of climate-induced disasters to Vermonters at the moment. That feels very helpful to me. And again, I don't have it fully baked in my mind about what that looks like, but happy to put some thinking into it and put it on the table if people think.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for.
And we've got, there we go. Chris, one more comment, and then we're getting close to the time where we need to finish up in this section. There's one more thing I want to drop in the chat before we do. Chris?
Yeah, so Leslie, and not to put you on the spot, but I think another thing that might be helpful is maybe a map or some way to graphically illustrate National Weather Service data points as far as like where damage occurred. It could be an aggregate, we can think about over time, but some way to kind of tell the story of what has happened since the last climate plan was updated. And that may be something, I'm happy to engage with you on that, figure out what it might look like. Maybe it already exists. But if some of these other things too, right, that if the data points exist, maybe some of our GIS mapping folk in the RPC world could do it. Maybe this is a project that we could engage with students at UVM to help map in one of the labs there. I'm hopeful it wouldn't be like a heavy lift, that this would exist in some kind of data file someplace. And I'm happy to talk to you about that later on, Leslie Ann, but it just seems like that would be a nice summary bit of information about, what climate impacts we've seen since the plan was first adopted.
I think that's a great idea, Chris, and might even sort of extend it back a little bit further because people seem to go back to Irene as a baseline, expanding that conversation a little bit to sort of broaden the understanding of why we need to do that all hazards approach in all places. So yeah, so let's chat about that some more. Great idea.
Super. Okay. So there's one more thing I wanted to mention before we switch gears. And that is one thing that will be different about this version of the plan is that section of highlighted or prioritized actions. And this is something we've talked about in several meetings, and we drew inspiration from the State Hazard Mitigation Plan where our big chunk of actions are all important. And we know it's important to call people's attention to the things you most want them to work on right away. And so we haven't set a number of what those numbers of actions are going to be, but it's in the, say, 20 to 40 range. And so we're going to be asking subcommittees for help, and then you all as a council to look at it across all the subcommittees. But ask for help initially with subcommittees and then you to say, if we had to lift up 20 to 40 actions and say, dear legislature, dear administration, dear everybody, these are some really, really important ones that we're going to hold some accountability to in particular. We need a way to do that as subcommittees and as council. You all have a prioritization process that you used last time, and we've talked about it before. I'm going to drop the slides in the chat from the last time we did this and talked about it in the spring. It should be the right link. Just let me make sure I did that correctly. Yeah. So that link that I just threw in the chat are the slides we've used previously. And so the last time you used a prioritization is where you got to the actions you have now. Now we need to tighten it up a little bit, right? If we're trying to lift up from each subcommittee, a handful of actions that we really want to showcase. So it's something that we're going to need to talk about at the subcommittee level. And if you all at a council have any guidance right now about it, that would be fantastic. But I recognize mostly we just want to flag this as you're going to need to be working with subcommittees on doing some initial prioritization. And then over the winter, after the subcommittees have lifted up each a handful of stuff, to look at that and see how that all comes together as a package of, let's call them 20 to 40 actions. I just want to check with folks quickly when you think about, does anybody have questions about what we're trying to do with that sort of list of 20 to 40? And any initial thoughts about helping subcommittees get to a handful? Is there anything we want to say about that right now? I'll just note we're a little bit out of time, unfortunately, but is there any quick reactions from counselors about this sort of list of prioritization? or list of prioritize actions, excuse me. Okay. So I think, Jane and I are a little worried about this just because it's going to come crushing down on all of us. But we're going to be trying to work with subcommittees over the next few weeks to get them ready so that come November, they're in a place where subcommittees feel confident that they have a way of not only prioritizing the big list of things they have, if they need to figure out if anything needs to drop off or the like, but getting to this like real handful of things that they want to lift up and give special attention to. Okay. Jane?
Thanks. I'm actually raising my hand just for one more comment or just about the table of contents and the work needed. Liz reminded me that if you've read the memo closely around cross-cutting issues, and we have made a request out to subcommittees to put forward one volunteer for each of those three groups to have limited meetings, 2 meetings that Liz will really be supporting administratively and doing the work in between to get us to sort of completion on cross-cutting pathway recommendations. And I believe that we've had little to no volunteers. But we'll let Liz, and they were due last Friday. And so we can only support you as through structures and systems, but just a reminder that this is your plan and counselors. And so we're coming to you to also, Liz can put a finer point on where there are gaps missing, but if subcommittees do not have capacity to take this on, these are really issues that come up to the council. And so ask you all how you want to deal with them, and if counselors have capacity to take on that work.
Yeah. For folks who haven't seen it, I just dropped the links in the chat to this cross-cutting memos thing that Liz Amler put together. And indeed, if subcommittees are not raising their hands quickly to help create these groups that'll drive this forward. Again, each of these 3 cross-cutting issues will have 2 meetings to develop some updated pathway strategies and actions. And we'll look to you as counselors to really step up and be helpful in driving that. If you have particular expertise in this, it'd be very helpful. Expect a call from me or Jane or Liz, I guess, would be the bottom line on that. Okay. All right. So what we want to do is I wanted to give, if that's, we'll wrap up this issue. Any last things on this issue of the outline? Okay. Jared, could you do like a 3-minute version of what this, what Science and Data did with the feedback last time from the social cost of greenhouse gases document, and just give that 3-minute version? Then we're going to take some public comment, and then we'll have some conversation and a vote or a decision point.
Yeah, and just because we have a number of new folks, I might also just start with some context about where this comes from.
And could it be extra brief context? Just
yes, I will do my best. So
Yeah.
as folks who are around will remember, in the initial climate action plan in 2021, there was a process underway, the federal government via an interagency working group to respond to recommendations from the National Academy of Sciences to update the social cost of greenhouse gases following the best available science. Those updates were not available at the time that we approved the first climate action plan in December of 2021. So we said that we would, as a council, as a science and data subcommittee, revisit the selection of the appropriate values, estimates to use for the social cost of greenhouse gases once that process was complete. And it was completed by the Environmental Protection Agency in November of 2023. And so what this memo is really straightforward. It is updating the selected estimates to use for benefit cost analysis to align with the National Academy's recommendations, the EPA's recent report in terms of best practices around how to do accurate benefit cost analysis that the federal government and now over 15 states as well, including Vermont, are using. So the Science and Data Subcommittee got a presentation actually from the lead author of this report, Dr. Elizabeth Koppitz, who's an economist at the EPA. And so that's just the background here. When we presented this at the last council meeting, there was a specific recommendation, I believe, both from Dr. Dupini-Giroux and Secretary Moore to make a little bit more clear the link, both current and any future updates, to following the recommendations of the national academies. And so you can see those very direct edits made via track changes to respond to those recommendations. And then once those were done, the Science and Data Subcommittee unanimously agreed to approve this slightly revised recommendation to come up to the council for approval.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared. That was great. Again, you can see the track change in the version I just dropped in the chat. And those track changes are all about making reference to the National Academies of Science, Engineering, Medicine in a stronger way. Okay. Excellent. So what I'd love to do is take some public comment now, and then we'll come back, make a decision on this, and then take a break because we've been going for a while now. So what I'd love to do, if folks who have been joining our meeting who would be interested in making a comment about the work we're doing, I'd welcome that. Bram, is there something you want to do before we do that?
Yeah, I just think it might be helpful to everyone. The social cost of greenhouse gases, I think the new number is $190 per ton. Is that right, Jared? Okay. No answer from Jared.
It varies depending on what year you use. It changes each year, and they have different numbers for different gases. I will put the chart that shows the different estimates by gas and by year.
No, I was just thought it'd be useful to know for people to know what we are going from and what we are going to for this discussion. I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Bram. Yeah, and I think the bottom line is it's a higher number than before, right? And these are numbers that are used to understand the costs and benefits of different actions related to reducing carbon, right? So you can get a sense. You use that number to understand the societal costs. Okay. So folks who have been joining us and listening to our conversation, this is a time to comment on this social cost of carbon thing, or greenhouse gas, excuse me, or anything else that we've been working on this morning. So I'll just go to hands. And if you're having trouble finding the hands, because Zoom seems to update all the time, there's a reaction tab at the bottom of your screen. It says react. Wow. That actually isn't where I find my hands right now. They keep changing it. Anyway, Alice figured it out. Alice, go ahead, please.
No, you're correct that should be you press the react little heart and it should be at the bottom of the options.
There it is. Yep, press the react heart and then you go raise hand. Thank you, Alice.
Okay, I guess I'm a public, but I'm also on the Rural Resources and Adaptation Subcommittee. And as such, I am now also chairing the Public Health Task Force. And what's interesting about the Public Health Task Force is we're kind of starting from scratch here, identifying public health issues, et cetera, that have not been in the climate action plan. So we're starting from scratch here. And as chair, I get to herd the cats and call the meetings, which have been excellent. And I also get to do what I call the homework, which are the spreadsheets and reports on our activities. And I just kind of want to make sure that I'm understanding cross-cutting, because what we are doing is looking at where some public health issues overlap or can be supplemented by, or we are consultative to issues for the other task force and areas that we're working on. And it's really basic and you've been doing it, but I'm hoping somebody can just give me an idea on what I'm doing to address cross-cutting in our task force.
Thanks, Alice. I'm really glad you made that comment. And I think it builds on the previous conversation about the cross-cutting piece. Before I jump into an answer to that, I just want to make sure that we have time if there's anybody else, and Alice, I don't want to lose that, so let's talk about it 1 second. But is there anybody else joining us today that has a comment or something they want to offer in this public comment period? Anybody else? And we're a small enough group, you can just unmute yourself if you want to speak. Okay. All right. Seeing that, let's jump, Alice, into your question, because I think it feeds off what we were just talking about, like what are those cross-cutting aims and how are they being addressed? And I wonder if some combination of Jane or Liz Amler would want to just take to walk us through those cross-cutting pieces quickly. And this is a helpful thing for us to do anyway. Liz or Jane, do you want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, with the cross-cutting, the 3 topic areas are education, workforce, and compact settlement. And so with those, that process is that these groups will form and have representatives from the different subcommittees. And so that is the differentiation from what you're talking about, which is your public health task group, which seems to like also, have different co-benefits or whatnot. But with this is like 3 very specific topic areas, and then pulling representatives from every subcommittee, which is what we're asking for now. So I say that's the difference there. But yeah, any other questions for that?
Thanks, Liz. I think that's really helpful. So Alice, let's just check in right now for a second. So those cross-cutting issues are 3 specific things around education, workforce, and something we're tentatively calling land use, or compact settlement, but it may have a slightly different name. So those are 3 things that don't have a happy home in any one subcommittee. And so they've been pulled out as a separate process. In something like public health and what you're working on, you are sort of leading that. And if it touches into other areas, that's okay. So I think you should feel confident to be the lead on this issue in developing the ideas of these issues, even if it cuts across into other areas.
Okay, great. Now the
Make sense?
education one I get, and we're also working in the social equity issues now. So yeah.
So for education, sorry, Alice, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say for the education issue, for instance, Alice, it might be really helpful for you to sit in and be part of the 2 conversations that are going to happen around education, because you might be able to lend that voice to say, hey, this is you might be doing education around climate, right? And we think public health issues are a big piece of this. So when you think about education, by the way, think about it in these ways. So having your voice in that conversation could be helpful.
Okay. And I think that also can segue right into what our big issue is right now, is communication, and making sure that communication of what we're describing as the major public health issues happens, especially as you head down into the municipal levels too. So, all right, that makes sense to me, and I think we can work on it from there.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I get it.
Wonderful. I'm glad you brought it up. Chris?
Alice, as has Jared Almer or somebody else with the Vermont Department of Health been engaging with you guys? He's the climate health program manager.
Yes, he's on my committee, on the
Awesome.
public
Okay,
health
great.
committee, which is really good. And we've had one-on-one conversations also
Great.
about programs and all. Yeah, thank you.
And I just got reappointed Friday afternoon at like 3, so I haven't figured out what committees I'm on yet, but I'll probably be heading your way. So
Okay.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks. Last call for any other public comment. We will do another public comment thing when we finish up around 1:40 today. So, but anything else right now? Okay. So before we jump to a break, which I think we all need, we want to just take a moment to test approval for the updated cost of greenhouse gases. Also, if anybody on the council has questions for Jared or the Science and Data Subcommittee about this update, now's a great time to ask. So let's pause for that first. Any questions for Jared or the Science and Data Subcommittee about this updated document, which will become something that you as a council take on and say, yeah, this is the way we want to be accounting for greenhouse gases when we do cost and benefit analysis, et cetera. Any questions for Jared or other members of the Science and Data? Okay. Does anybody have any concerns about that document in the revision, the edits that are in that document? Any concerns about that, counselors? Does anybody need a little more time to, i.e. like 1 more minute to mull it over? Okay. So I'm not seeing any concerns and I'm not seeing requests for more time. So with that, let's treat this document as approved by you all as a council. Thank you all for that. And thanks, Jared and the Science and Data for pulling that through. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So with that, let's go ahead and take a break. And we were gonna give ourselves a pretty long break. Why don't we come back at 10 minutes before the hour? That gives us a little more than 15 minutes, if that's okay. So it's a little change from the agenda. The agenda says 12:55. Let's be back at 12:50, 10 minutes before the hour. All right. And we'll see you all back here in just about 15, 20 minutes. Okay. So 12:50, we'll take it back up. Thanks, everyone. We can pause the recording now.
Reflection.
Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry. We didn't push the record button when we came back.
One is that it seems like I looked at them both in the comments and on the bulleted comments. It seems like those are people who are looking for, similar to Eric's point, are looking for government related solutions. Whereas Kasha's summary of discussion at the Essex Car Show, it almost feels like the two different groups of people need to be talking to each other. Seems like huge disconnects. The other thing, since I'm wearing the municipal hat again, is like there's this language: make towns build affordable units in all new development. Towns don't build housing, and there's this disconnect, I think. And there are other things like towns do this, towns do that. Our towns are generally struggling just to do their daily business, and I think this understanding within Vermont about what towns historically have done, what they have the capacity to do. We need to really understand that. I'm representing RPCs on the County Regional Governance Study Committee, Technical Advisory Group, where we're starting to look at, at what scale does it make sense to make decisions? And critically, like at what scale does it make this sense to actually do the capital planning, capital investment, capital management of the basic infrastructure just to achieve, probably 85% of the things that even the climate action plan calls for. Because I can tell you, just planning in other places, like the way you develop housing, the way you plan for more climate adaptive settlement patterns, is you do detailed physical master planning, you develop a capital improvement plan, you develop a capital fund. You tie these things together, you make the investments to incentive to direct the development where you need it to go. And it's beyond just the planning and just the zoning. There's the actual infrastructure piece of this. And to my mind, this is part of what we need to engage the public on. It's like, to actually achieve these things, these are the kinds of things that have to happen. Where do you feel like that should happen? Or do you still want it to happen? So that we kind of have more of a reality check on who can and should do what to like really make things happen, not just plan for it.
Right. And so one of the things you're reacting to, Chris, is like when you read some of this, you can sense that there can be some misunderstandings. You can sense that there may be some folks that don't fully understand something, right? Or actually have misinformation on on things. So that comes through sometimes when you read through a summary like what we have here. Jared?
Thanks, David. Yeah, reading through both of them, I just wanted to share that the one quote that stood out the most to me, and I really appreciate the places where there's direct quotes rather than just bullet points or summaries of it, but it was from the first quarter one, and it was from a farm worker who I assume it was from the organic farming conference, the bottom of page 3, said, "This was the first summer that I really took home the anxiety about the well-being of the farm with me. It feels so personal, even when you don't own the business. There are all kinds of farmer grants, but none of them are for farm laborers. I was so worried, it makes me emotional to think about it." And it reminded me of conversations I've had with people like all over Vermont, central Vermont, who will say things like, before 2023, I used to find the sound of rain comforting, and now it just makes me anxious. Anybody who's had their home or business or church flooded and been mucking out last summer, this summer, I think that anxiety is really real for folks, and I appreciated the opportunity to just hear from people directly in their own words what that's like.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah. Dr. Mark Levine?
Yeah, Jared set me up well. So, I mean, the first question that was asked about how are they experiencing climate impacts? And when you read these comments, especially the quotes, but just sort of read the whole gestalt, you really come away with the fact that people are expressing their frustration and anger. It's not necessarily at anything specific. Sometimes it's against the government, but I think sometimes it's just the situation that we're all in. But they're also sort of addressing all these other themes, like the housing insecurity aspects of life in Vermont now, the affordability of life in Vermont. And they're expressing tremendous anxiety. And even when they're not expressing it in anxiety, but they're expressing it in frustration and anger, that brings up the whole theme of mental health. And I think one thing that has been lost is we're not doing any of this climate change stuff for like just to honor some regulation or to, because we've been told to and we have to do it. It's because we can't live on the planet anymore if we don't start doing these things. And it's all about health. And one thing that that keeps coming up for me is that connection between all of the stuff we do at these meetings and all of the stuff that we let people ventilate about and their health sometimes lost. And maybe we need to sort of return to that a little, if for only to get greater buy-in and greater consensus about things, because people, are seeing it from so many different vantage points. And the reality is, yes, flooding is a big issue in Vermont, and it's related to climate change, and look what it's doing to people's health. Heat is a big issue. What's it doing to people's health? people aren't supposed to go out in certain communities after 6 o'clock because of the mosquitoes. Well, how does that relate to climate change and health? All of this is tied together. And the overarching theme I took from these two sets of comments was mental health is not good right now. And whether we give it a discrete DSM diagnosis like anxiety, or whether we just listen to people's frustration and at times anger, and at other times just confusion about things, they're not in a good place. And I think sort of acknowledging that is going to be important, and not just acknowledging it, but reconnecting them to the fact that we're all concerned about health, and that's why we're doing all of this stuff. And we need to really just clarify that messaging.
Thank you, Mark. That's fantastic. What an interesting reflection. And we had earlier today in the call, Alice Peel, who's leading this task group on public health. It feels like there's a lot of opportunity to link more directly what you all are doing as a council and through your subcommittees to this reality of people's health and public health and mental health.
Yeah, I'm on that subcommittee, and
Right.
the community, she's right, the communication portion of that is going to be huge. We have terms like rural adaptation and what have you, but it's easy to bring health into that. We have terms like resilience. Well, it's all about our health when we're talking about resilience. Sure, it's resilience of the planet and the climate and everything else, but it's resilience of the people.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks,
Great.
Mark. June.
Thank you. It's just wonderful to follow Dr. Levine, with whom I've shared more than one foxhole on questions of public policy and emergency. So I'm always deeply impressed and inspired by your ability to get to the nub of it. I don't have your authority. So when I say it's all about health, it just doesn't resonate the way it does when you do. But that's exactly right. It's all about health. And it's not just mental health or emotional health, which is also, I think, the gist of what Jared was talking about. It's also physical health, as in the sense of security and well-being. Having myself lived through the devastation of Irene, I remember very well that feeling of, oh my God, it's going to rain again, and I'm terrified. So that's very real. And with the immediacy of those feelings, I look at this list, and the first thing I see is a disconnect in language. Chris did a wonderful job of highlighting this point. He emphasized how folks were saying, well, towns should do this, towns should build more housing. And his comeback was exactly what I would expect for somebody who's been leading in his space so long. Towns don't do that, and he's absolutely right. But those folks mean one thing when they say town, and you mean another. And we don't have, I think, a very good finger or pulse on what is a mutual understanding and what is not as we try to reach out to people. We've asked questions that we understand. We're getting back answers that we understand, but I don't know that we see how those answers connect to what we're trying to do. The list here in one of these reports about more public transportation, we're not learning about climate in school, electric vehicles are way too expensive, all new buildings should have solar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are people telling us how they see, how they understand how we should be dealing with climate change. But we're here, David, I'm going to challenge use of the term dilemma, dealing with the proposition for a moment that our focus is to reduce emissions. And I don't see folks here saying reduce emissions. I see them saying make stuff possible, make stuff feasible. The stuff you're doing, government, whoever you are, is not doing it. No question asked about whether government can do these things, never mind with what resources. And so before I get into the give and take, which I'm not going to do now, as to whether these specific things are or are not doable, I'm just going to conclude my observations with saying when you're going to reach people or go to meet people where they are, you also have to be sure you speak their language, and I'm not sure we do. Also, one other thing I have to make, an observation I have to make as a point of conscience. I have very distinct memories of a previous counselor. I don't remember Abby's last name, but I remember she was active on the agricultural committee, I think.
Abby Course.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, Abby Course.
Hmm.
I remember Abby being impassioned, being, if not in tears, close to being in tears, because she felt that this council was not being appropriately receptive to the need to focus on food production, food resiliency in climate policy. And the first thing that jumped out to me here was the degree to which people were pointing to food as an issue. And so I would caution against losing that memory. It's not like we haven't been talking about it, it's that we talked about it and chose not to emphasize it, or we chose not to hear what council members had to say about it. Thank you.
Thanks, June. Alice, I see your hands up, and since this is directly related to the work you're doing in the task group, I'm happy to have you chime in here. I bet you want to react to some of the public health issues that we've been talking about.
I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Levine. He just gave you an excellent summary of the work our task force is doing and has done. And I think you can also see where now I'm thinking our cross-cutting, our look at cross-cutting is going to go. And I think we've taken public health and climate change and really elevated it to significant status or level to look at in the climate action plan. And one other piece that's happening, I had a meeting with Ben Rose from Vermont Emergency Management, and I believe Eric Forand from Vermont Emergency Management touched on it in this meeting, is housing. And when we build housing, where are we building it? Making sure that it's built equitably so that our less advantaged residents don't wind up getting built in areas that are substandard. And we're also looking at the sustainability of the type of housing we put in. So anyhow, you got a really good look at where Public Health Task Force and what we've been doing.
Thanks, Alice. Appreciate it. And certainly it's something that's loud and clear in these comments. Okay. Love the conversation. Happy to have it go on just a tiny bit more. Are there other reflections from folks, counselors, when you read through that maybe haven't been emphasized so much? Or maybe you had a different take than what you heard in the reflection right now. Anything else?
I'll just chime in. I'm sitting in for Michelle, and just a sense of sort of immediacy came through to me. And I think that's probably on everyone's mind here as well, but things are happening. There's acknowledgement that things are happening. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe it's not enough fast enough. So that's what came through to me.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrea. Okay. All right. So the intent here obviously is for all of us, whether here or in the subcommittees, that we're taking advantage of the work that's getting done out in Vermont to talk to a range of folks. And so we want to continue to create these touch points for us to connect in with that. If you do have feedback about how this work is getting done, like for instance, Jared said, it's really helpful to have direct quotes that feels, much more visceral and real. June, making sure that when we're talking with folks, we're meeting them with the language that they use and makes sense to them. If you have some thoughts about the work and how it's getting done, we'd welcome those, because it's going to be quite important over the next 6 months, as you all are really trying to wrestle with this updated climate action plan. So if there's any thoughts about that right now, happy to take those, or just reach out directly to Jane, Sophie, or me about how this work happens over the next period of time. For those who are listening to the recording, indeed, we forgot to hit the record button on the back end of coming out of our break. So there's a little bit of gap there where I presented a presentation, which will be linked in on the calendar invite about the work getting done. And then we started the conversation about what we're hearing. Okay, anything else, counselors, on this that you'd like to talk about? And for those of you who are deeply involved in subcommittees, again, finding some time and space in subcommittees to do something like this, like an exercise like this, may be helpful. And so if you'd like any assistance from me or my team on that, just let me know. Okay, great. So with that, we have a final, sorry, Leslie Ann, your hand.
Yeah, thanks, David. I just had one quick observation. It's from a geography perspective. I don't know what the plans are to make sure that we are chatting with folks all around the state. I noticed that there was a little bit of a focus on the northern and western parts of the state, and just curious if we are planning to be in the Kingdom, Central Vermont, Southern Vermont, to make sure we're hearing everybody. And just to echo a lot of the things that we just heard, when you speak back to somebody what they just said, it has a very uplifting effect, because it means I heard you. And so as we're thinking about the stories part, if we can include a lot of the direct quotes, because people will see themselves in their written words, in their spoken words. So that part is absolutely critically important. Then, having been on the council from the beginning, it's really, really, it's a cherished moment to hear all of the things that we struggled with 4 years ago coming back full circle, and a lot of the new folks saying the same things that we were trying to do in terms of crosscuts, and to hear that being uplifted again, because it means we're on the right track. So just kudos to us all as we try to make sure we're doing as good of a job this time around as we possibly can.
Thanks, Leslie Ann. Yeah, appreciate that. And on the geography thing, indeed, there's a very explicit effort to be reaching all parts of the state. And we have been up in the Kingdom and been doing things around in the South and elsewhere. So indeed, we're taking that directly on board, because I think that geographic diversity is very important, and we're trying to make that happen. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks, everyone. We have a final moment. If anybody is left from the public who would like to make a comment, we have a final piece there before we jump into our next steps. So if anybody's been listening into our call and would like to chime in. Okay. I'm not seeing that, but feel free. Okay. So let's talk about the next few months. Jane, did you have something you wanted to share on the next few months and talk about what's going to be happening next until our next meeting in December?
I don't have anything prepared, David, but I will use this moment, since we were just talking about public engagement, to lift up the interested party events that we're planning with the subcommittees over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks. The timeline's been pushed back. Those meetings will occur the last week of October into the first 2 weeks of November, hearing from subcommittees the need for a bit more time to prepare both the topic areas they want to focus on as well as the content for that. A reminder that the capacity in that space is that subcommittees, the three who are crafting sort of the meat of the regulations, cross-sector mitigation, rural resilience, as well as ag and eco, have the opportunity to hold up to 2 interested party events meetings focused around the areas of sort of new or revised action in the climate action plan, or proposed for the climate action plan. In addition to those 6 meetings, we also have capacity through a separate grant with RPCs to support 2 meetings focused specifically on municipal action across all three of those subcommittees. So it won't be sort of focused on any one subcommittee in general, but really lifting up a cohesive story on what municipal action looks like across the three subcommittees. Those will be hosted and supported by RPCs at the same time. And we're just starting to think about how to pull those together. So that's total of 8 stakeholder interested party meetings happening the end of October into November, focused specifically on support of the subcommittees. And then, as David alluded to, the Climate Action Office, really in parallel to a lot of the work happening in support of the Climate Action Plan, is hosting other meetings, somewhat focused on our contractual work, but the one of most interest to all of you is the Cap and Invest study that we discussed earlier in the meeting today. That will also be holding 4 interested party events at the same time to inform the development of that study and ultimately the recommendation that will come from the Treasurer's Office to the legislature in that space. Those meetings will happen in October, but will be kicked off with some public meetings at the beginning of October, I believe on October 2nd-ish, that week. Andrea can correct me or put the date. So we're also having public meetings in that. So I really just encourage folks that all of these meetings, the support that our office and CBI provides is in service to the Climate Council for those interested party meetings. If the subcommittees and council don't want to hold them, so be it, but really encourage folks to work with us as we send out requests and deadlines to lift up those meetings. And we can only make them as helpful and productive as you all want them to be. So thank you for dealing with all the requests we send your way and helping us plan those events. And that's really, David, the focus of the work over the near term. And then in service of the next December meeting, we'll be working really closely with the steering committee to really build out that table of contents and work plan that will really need to be honed in on by the December meeting of the Climate Council to ensure that we have drafts and have time to deliberate on and plan for the sort of public engagement in the spring and rollout of the plan so that we're all coming together for July 1st.
Great. Thanks, Jane. Questions about what's going to be happening in the next few months? The real activity is going to be in the subcommittees, right, over the next few months and trying to, as Jane says, pull together a package of proposed pathway strategies and actions by the end of the year. That's the big heavy lift. And in December, we're going to be working as a council, looking at some of that and sort of getting our ducks in a row to be able to work over the winter towards a draft, sort of a draft of the entire updated climate action plan. Questions, reactions, comments, thoughts? And the key person sending out emails now is Liz Amler. And so that's an important email to open up when it crosses across. Make sure you have her in your contacts and everything, because Liz will be sending out sort of updates on specific requests or specific updates for the council. Excellent. Anything else, councilors, before we wrap up here today? All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Appreciate everyone's participation today, particularly in that last conversation. We're sort of making sure the guardrails are in place to get the work done this year. Appreciate you all doing that. Steering committee will be meeting in between to make sure we're sorting out our December meeting. Subcommittees are doing all that work. And there will be this activity with stakeholder meetings, interested party meetings, as well as the work that CBI is doing around public engagement. So thanks, everyone. I think that's it. Jane, anything else from you? Okay. All right.
Everybody.
Happy Monday, everyone. Take care. Have a good week.